disorders such as autism or Asperger's. Those are very, very rare. Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about each one of these disorders. First, mental retardation. Mental retardation must be diagnosed by a specialist. This is where a child is given an IQ test. The IQ test is a standard test given all across the world in many different languages, many different cultures, that measure intelligence. Well, intelligence really means how well they do in academics. So we're going to measure a child's IQ, and it's not until this IQ is measured that we can begin to understand whether or not a child is mentally retarded or not. All that means is that the child's IQ score fell below a certain number. If this is the case, then the educational systems need to know so that they can give your child the right kind of work at a level that your child can succeed with. Another disorder, learning disabilities. You've probably heard a lot about learning disabilities. Some children have reading disabilities. That's probably one of the most common learning disabilities. This is also diagnosed by a specialist. It's diagnosed as well when we give an IQ test. So the child, what we find out about the child's intelligence is that that's normal. The child is a normally intelligent child. But when we assess their reading or their math or any other academic skill, what we find out is that reading, for example, is well below what should be normal for this child. So there's a mismatch. There's a mismatch between how intelligent the child is and how well they read, or how well they do math, or how well they spell. A number of different possibilities. This is called a learning disability. We need to also assess these properly, and the school would be able to come up with a program to best match your child's learning disability should one be diagnosed. The next group of disorders are called communication disorders. This is when a child is either not speaking at the level you would think they would speak, given their age, or they don't understand language at the level you would expect them to understand language. The first thing we do before we even think about communication disorder is test a child's hearing. So you want to make sure that's first. The second thing we would do is make sure that the child is fluent in the language in which we're assessing them. That would be the second thing. So when a child is having problems producing words or understanding what's being said, and you think your child might be a little bit below what they should be for their age, you should ask for an assessment. Go ahead and have your child assessed, and let's see if there is a communication difficulty. The good news about communication disorders is the sooner we catch them, we can actually remediate them. We can help that child begin to speak and understand language at a normal level much more quickly. The next group, one you've all heard about, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is a ADHD, a very common term. A lot of people use it, and way too many children have been diagnosed with ADHD who don't actually have it. Children are normally active. They're very, very active. Children pay attention to things they enjoy, and they don't pay attention to things they don't enjoy. Sometimes we misinterpret this and we think this means the child has ADHD. This is a disorder that can only be diagnosed by a specialist, and it's not as common as you might think. If you think your child might be overly active, or if you think your child might not be paying attention or focusing well enough, then the rest of this discussion we're going to have, I'm going to teach you how to look at certain aspects of a child behavior. You want to start writing down what you see. You want to start thinking about what you see so you can share that with teachers and with specialists, just to make sure that your child does not have ADHD. Oppositional disorder. This is a disorder about children who quarrel a lot, children who break rules, children who are very irritable, children who even refuse to cooperate with their best friends. Now, everything I just said is a normal behavior at some point. We have fights with friends, we quarrel with each other. Not all of us want to follow all the rules. So there's a whole lot of normal behavior in there. It only becomes abnormal when it really starts to interfere with your child's ability to have friends, when it interferes with you and your child's relationship, when it interferes with your child's ability to learn. That's when it actually becomes a disorder. So once again, if you listen to the rest of this discussion, we'll give you some questions to ask yourself and thoughts about what to note and pay attention to if you think your child may have trouble with oppositional disorder. Okay, there's a quick little checklist called the Pediatric Symptoms Checklist. I use it and I give it to parents who come in and ask me, is there a problem? There are a number of different behaviors on this checklist, and from this checklist we ask you, does your child show this particular behavior or that one? And it's a good checklist because it gets us looking at a whole variety of our child's behavior. This is what the Pediatric Symptom Checklist looks like. Now, I know it's hard to see this busy little thing up on your screen, but it's a whole variety of behaviors, and you would answer whether your child shows this behavior often or not. So let me break it down into smaller groups. All right, the first group is about health concerns. Does your child have a lot of aches and pains? Are there times you find yourself going to the doctor but nothing really wrong is found? These are called somatic concerns. This often happens when a child is upset, and when we're upset, our body hurts. It's important to begin to find out if that's going on with your child. So we have the health concern group of behaviors. There's another group that may indicate problems with attention or activity level. Does your child seem to be on a little motor that never shuts off, constantly moving, jumping up and down, running around? Is your child never able to pay attention? Now, there's a good question inside that. Does your child pay attention? I have parents ask me if their child has attention deficit problems because the child doesn't want to pay attention when they're doing their history or their science at school. And what we find out is the child absolutely loves to pay attention to their video game. They can pay long hours of attention to their video game, but they're just not really interested in history or science. Anytime a child can pay attention for a long period of time, we don't have an attention deficit disorder. What we probably have is a mismatch of what the child likes to do or can understand or is able to do and what the child's being asked to do. And that's important to understand as well. There's another group that might show problems in relationships with others and has to do with fighting with other children, teasing other children, blaming other people for everything that happens. Children can become very irritable. These are signs of problems with relationships. We want to take a look at when they happen. Do they only happen in certain places, with certain people, at certain times? Those are the kinds of questions we would want to ask. Some of the other items in the child checklist, emotional indicators. Does the child seem sad a lot? Does the child say things that sound pretty hopeless, that they'll never be any good at anything or no one will ever like them? These are the kinds of things we want to pay attention to. Also, anxiety and difficulty relating to others. Does your child have a little bit of problem with paying attention to friends, understanding their friends' emotions? Does your child not seem to understand when other children are upset with them? These are things we might want to also take a look at. And we also have other problem areas like grades dropping, different worries, problems with teachers, problems at school. These are the different kinds of things we look at in a child problem checklist. Okay, so now that we've been over what's normal and what's abnormal in problems, and we've talked about how one looks at potential for disorder, and remember disorders are very rare, but how we look at that, what we want to do is give you some advice, some suggestions and guidelines on centering on your child. That's paying particular attention to certain aspects of your child's behavior. So we're going to be centering on the child, But we're also going to have you center on you, because in every interaction, there's at least two people there. So we want to also center on ourselves. What do we do when our child does certain things? Okay, the secret to centering is to start first with a list of questions I'm going to give you. Ask yourself these questions. Then watch, observe your child, pay attention, observe yourself. That's the secret to centering, is this observation. And once we observe, we start to find patterns. We start to find answers to questions we hadn't had, and important answers, like maybe at a certain time of day, your child struggles a little bit more with certain types of things, or maybe with certain settings, certain social groups, your child is struggling a little bit more. So what we want to do is focus on a number of child-centered questions. Now, I'm just going to read the questions off to you and discuss them with you for a minute. What is your child doing well? What positive behaviors are present? What are his or her best behaviors? When do these behaviors occur? And the most important question of all is, how do you respond when they're being really, really good? You know what's interesting? Most of us have learned to respond to bad behaviors, and we don't pay a whole lot of attention when our child's being good. I'm going to suggest that you reverse that strategy. If you want to see better behavior from your child, you want to focus on better behavior, and you want to reward it. And this is what we call catch them being good. So the first question is about positive behaviors, not negative. I'd much rather have you watch your child and notice all of the really wonderful good things they do. Now, by being good, that doesn't mean that they're running around being helpful, doing the dishes or whatever it is they can do. What it means is they're behaving well. They're happily talking, they're sharing information, they're working on their homework, they're happily watching TV if that's the activity they're supposed to be doing. They chat with their brothers and sisters in a positive way. This is good behavior. This is what we want to watch for. So that's your first question. If you spend more time on this first question than any other question, that'll be the most important thing you can do to focus on your child. Let's look at question number 2. How well is the child adapted to your routine? Every family has routines. Some children adapt beautifully to routines, but some children have problems with changes in routine. Some children have problems with any routine. And so you want to ask yourself these kinds of questions. Does your child seem to understand and anticipate what's going to happen next? If they know that dinner time is coming up, do they get ready for it, or do they wait to the last minute? If they know bath time is coming up, is there a struggle about transitioning over to bath time? This is what I mean about watching for routine, watching for changes in routine. And very importantly, how did you set up the routine? Is it something that best matches your schedule? Now, that's what most of us do as parents. We have schedules we have to meet.